Welcome to Meliora's channel, your go-to place for C# and data analysis tutorials, products hands-on demos, and insider secrets to keep you at the cutting edge of innovation. Our goal is to break down complex tech topics to a level that you will easily understand to supercharge your skills. Without further ado, let's jump right.
Welcome. So in today's lecture, we're going to be looking at an introduction to table triggers in MySQL. So first things first, what exactly are table triggers? Well, table triggers are database objects that specify specific actions to be done when certain database events occur. There can be triggers for various database events and objects. For this particular video, we're going to just be focusing on table triggers, which is the default in MySQL. And we're going to focus on table triggers that are associated with data modification. For this video, specifically the insert statement. Well, we're going to be using the employee data table, and we're going to create a trigger that runs when we try to insert a new employee on that table. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at creating the table trigger. So this is just how to create the trigger. This is a skeleton which is available on the MySQL documentation for creating triggers. So first of all, you want to use create. The definer is user, so that's just the name of the account, so you can just leave that. So create trigger, then you have the trigger name, the trigger time, so it's either before or after the event occurs where you want the trigger to be fired. And then the event, so it can be insert, update, delete, or those are the data modifications that we're talking about creating the trigger for. And then on the table name, for each row, okay, that's also by default MySQL uses row triggers. And then you now want the trigger order, so it's follow, precedes, and all that. And depending on if you have another trigger you want to put this trigger after. Okay, so now we want to now go ahead and create the trigger. I just showed you the documentation skeleton, but we're going to do it step by step now. So the goal we want to do is we want to create a table trigger in MySQL to make sure that any new staff salary is above 20,000. So anytime you're entering a staff, you would want to make sure the salary is above 20,000, so more than 20,000. Okay. Okay, and this is the trigger that we are going to create. So let's step through this step by step. So first of all, we have the delimiter. If you remember when we did the stored procedure, you want to set the delimiter to something else so that the whole trigger is not stopped prematurely. So you want to make sure that the end of the whole trigger is different from the normal delimiter so that it separates the actual SQL statements from the whole trigger itself. So we start off by making the delimiter the double equal sign, double question marks rather. Then we now set it back to the semicolon at the end. So within that, we now have our create trigger, and then the name of the trigger. In this case, it is check underscore sal, like shortened check salary. And we now want it to be before insert on employee data. So we want this trigger to run before we insert a new employee. So we're kind of validating the values for insert. And then we're going to do for each row. So this is a row trigger, which is the default in MySQL. Then we now have begin and end. And you can see now we're using that new delimiter at end so that it knows that whole area there right now is our trigger. And then this is now the logic for checking the value. So you can see the use of new. If new dot salary, so that's the new, just so that, okay, that's the new value being entered, dot salary, so that's where the value is. So you know how we do our inserts, and then we now have the salary at the end, and so it's checking based on the column that we've specified we're entering that data into. So that's new salary. So we want to check if it's less than or equal to 20,000. So if it's less than or equal to 20,000, then we now want to do a signal SQL states that's you can see it's 45,000. So that's just a state for all unhandled SQL errors. So, and you can now set the message text I want to see in the output area, which is salary should be a higher value. Okay, so all it's doing, remember, new.salary. So if we're trying to check maybe the departments, maybe or maybe we're trying to check a higher date or something, it will be new dot the column name where the value that we want to check is, depending on what values we're entering. And then the check we want to do, which is less than 20,000, less than or equal to 20,000, it has to be above. Then we now have the things I want to put in the middle, and then we now have end if at the end. So a very simple if statement that's going to now do that for us. And that is the whole trigger. Now let's go ahead and run this in MySQL. Okay, so here we are in the MySQL workbench. So we can see that whole trigger function that we just reviewed. So we have the delimiter, check cell, and all that. So now I'm just going to go ahead and execute that. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we are using the right database. So we're just going to come here and do our use statement, right? So now that that's done, always make sure you use your using statement. Okay. And now we have created that trigger. So now if we want to see, let's go ahead and refresh. And then we'll come to tables, employee data, expand that. And then under triggers, now we can see the check style trigger has now been created. So now let's take a look at the trigger in action, right? So here I already have prepared an insert statement to insert into employee data. First of all, let's select all from employee data, so we can see the last person is Amy, which we inserted before when we were doing our and we removed her department code when we were doing our joins. So we can see that. And now we want to insert this new employee. So we have YV1012 Mantu Smith, was born in the year 1986, and he's going to be in department 600. It's a male, and you can see now that we put a salary of 10,000 for him. Now we expect that this insert is going to fail because this salary value is not greater than 20,000. So let's go ahead and run that and see. And as you can see, we have an error. So you can see that that failed. I can see error code salary should be a higher value, which is the set text message that we did here when we created our trigger. So you can see that that has failed, right? And let's go ahead and select all from employee data again, and we can truly see that that insert really completely failed. So now let's go ahead and make this again. Let's now put it, remember it's less than or equal to, that's going to trigger this. So now let's put 20,000 and see. And you can see it still failed because it's checking, it has to be greater than 20,000, not just equal to 20,000. So you can see that that still failed again. So the trigger is working exactly so as we intended. So now let's put in a value of, let's say, 30,000. And you can see that that's now worked perfectly. And let's now select all from employee data again. And you can now see that Mantu has now been successfully inserted now because salary is greater than 20,000, which is exactly what we wanted. So it's wonderful that that is working as intended. Okay, and last but not the least, we're now going to look at dropping our triggers that we have now created. So it's very, very simple. All we need to do is just run drop trigger and then the trigger name to drop a trigger. Okay, so here we are back in the MySQL workbench, and let's just, so we see that we had the creates trigger cell. So let's just go ahead and write drop, yeah. Put the semicolon, don't forget, and then we just need to go ahead and execute that. Executed perfectly, and then let's just refresh and we can see that the trigger is gone. Okay, so and that brings us to the end of the lecture, and thank you very much for sitting through the lecture. So now we've had our basic introduction to table triggers. we've created a trigger that happens before a function occurs, which is an insert, in this case, an insert statement where it's checking a particular value that's coming into the table and making sure it fits some criteria. All right. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video.